I'm Anna. I'm 28 years old, and my own parents took me to court for stealing their retirement fund, a fund that never even existed. Before I tell you how a single forgotten internet post from a decade ago blew their entire case apart in front of a judge, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. It all started 6 months ago on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because we had just pushed a major software update at work, and the office was buzzing with that unique energy of collective relief and accomplishment. For the first time in weeks, I left before the sun had fully set. I was a senior software engineer, and I loved the clean, logical world of code. You write a command, it executes. There are rules, there is order. It was a stark contrast to the messy chaos my life was about to become. Driving home, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of pride. It was a feeling I had chased for a decade. Just that morning, I had transferred the final payment into my mortgage account, officially owning my first apartment, free and clear, years ahead of schedule. It wasn't a palace, just a one-bedroom condo in a decent part of the city. But it was my fortress. Every brick, every window was a testament to years of ramen noodle dinners, skipped vacations, and a relentless focus on a single goal: independence. Financial, emotional, total independence. I walked into my apartment, the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings still lingering in the air. I dropped my keys into a ceramic bowl by the door, a small, simple act that felt monumental. This was my bowl in my home. I looked around at the sparse furniture, the boxes I still hadn't unpacked, and I smiled. I had made it. That evening was my quiet celebration. No fancy dinner, no party, just me. A large pepperoni pizza steaming in its cardboard box, and a cold beer. I was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, scrolling through my phone when the building intercom buzzed. It was the mail carrier with a certified letter. I had to come down and sign for it. I figured it was just the final deed from the county. More paperwork for the pile. I jogged downstairs, signed the electronic pad with a flourish, and took the stiff, official-looking envelope back upstairs. Back in my apartment, I slid it open with my thumb. The letterhead was from a law firm I'd never heard of, Willocks, Crane, and Associates. My brow furrowed. I didn't know any associates from Willocks or Crane. Then my eyes hit the first line. On behalf of our clients, Richard and Helen Smith. The pizza in my stomach turned to lead. My parents. Why were they using a law firm to contact me? My eyes scanned the page, the legal jargon swimming before me, but certain phrases leaped out, sharp and venomous. Breach of verbal contract, unjust enrichment, immediate repayment of Parent Plus student loans taken out for your educational benefit. My heart started a frantic, painful drumming against my ribs. I forced myself to read on, my breath catching in my throat. The letter meticulously listed loan disbursements for every single semester I was in college. Fall 2015, spring 2016, on and on. Then, at the bottom of the page was the total, a number so monstrous it seemed impossible. In $154,012 plus accrued interest. I read the number again, convinced my eyes were deceiving me. Couldn't be right. It was a sum so large it could swallow my entire life savings. Could swallow this apartment. Could swallow me. But the final sentence was the one that truly stopped my heart. It wasn't a request. It was a cold, calculated threat. Failure to arrange a payment plan within 30 days will result in legal action to reclaim assets, including but not limited to liens on property and wage garnishment. Wage garnishment. Lines on property. They were coming for my home, the home I had just finished paying for. They were coming for my salary, the one I worked so hard to earn. I sank back against the wall, the letter trembling in my hand. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a misunderstanding. The formality, the legal language, the 30-day ultimatum. This was a declaration of war. My own parents, the two people who were supposed to be my staunchest defenders, had just aimed a financial bazooka at my head and were threatening to pull the trigger. I sat there for what felt like hours, the pizza growing cold, the beer growing warm. The silence of my new, empty home was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating, filled with a single, screaming question. Me, why? To understand the sheer earth-shattering shock of that letter, you have to understand the story my parents had crafted for me, the one I had believed without question for 10 years. It was a story of their sacrifice, my compromise, and our collective team effort. It was also a complete and utter lie. Let's rewind a decade. I was 18, and my entire world revolved around a single shimmering goal: Stanford University. It wasn't just about the prestige. I had read about their engineering program, the professors, the culture of innovation. It felt like my mecca. I poured every ounce of my being into my application. I sacrificed weekends for SAT prep, gave up parties for AP homework, and wrote my application essay from the heart. I remember the day the acceptance letter arrived. It was a thick, heavy envelope, a good omen. My hands shook as I tore it open in the driveway. The first word I saw was congratulations, and a sound of pure, unadulterated joy ripped out of my throat. I sprinted inside, waving the letter like a flag of victory. "I got in, Mom, Dad, I got in, Stanford!" The reaction was muted. It was the first red flag, but I was too high on adrenaline to see it. My mom, Helen, was arranging flowers on the coffee table. She looked up, a tight, forced smile on her face. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful." My dad, Richard, was at his desk in the corner paying bills. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I would later learn meant he was stressed or calculating. "Well, sweetheart," he said, his voice heavy, "that's a hell of an accomplishment, but we need to be realistic." "The letter mentions a generous financial aid package," I said, my excitement starting to curdle with confusion. "They're offering a big scholarship." That's when they sat me down at the kitchen table for what they called a dose of reality. My dad pulled out a yellow legal pad and a calculator. "Okay, let's break this down," he began. He started scribbling numbers. He talked about tuition, but then he added room and board, health insurance fees, travel costs for holidays, books, supplies. He inflated every possible cost, creating a terrifying mountain of expenses. "Look, Anna," my mom said, placing her hand over mine. Her hand was cool, her touch gentle, but her words were a dagger. "The scholarship is wonderful, a real honor, but it's a partial scholarship. Covers a good chunk, but there's still a huge gap, a gap we simply can't afford." I stared at the numbers on the legal pad. They seemed impossibly high. "But are you sure?" I stammered. "Maybe we can get loans." "We don't want to saddle you with that kind of debt," my dad said, shaking his head with an air of paternal wisdom. "It would follow you for decades, and we can't co-sign. Our credit isn't good enough for a loan that big." Another lie. "The state university here," he continued, tapping his pen on the table, "is an excellent engineering school. You can live at home. We can help you out. Handle the paperwork, maybe take out a few small, manageable loans in our name to make it easier. We'll be a team. We'll get you through it." I felt the dream die right there at the kitchen table. It was a quiet, painful death. I wasn't just disappointed, I was ashamed. I felt like I had failed. I had gotten into the best school, but I hadn't been good enough to earn the full ride. I had put my parents in this awkward, difficult position. I was a burden. "Okay," I whispered, my eyes on the table. "Okay, the state school is fine." I believed them. I was 18. They were my parents. Why on earth would they lie about something like that? The second act of their play began a few months later. My older brother David was a good guy, but he wasn't an academic. He coasted through high school with B's and C's. One night, my parents called a family meeting, their faces beaming. "We have incredible news," my mom announced. "David has been accepted to a prestigious private university on the East Coast." I was floored. "Wait, what? I thought we couldn't afford expensive schools." My dad puffed out his chest. "Well, your mother and I have been doing some creative financial planning. We've decided to make a significant investment in David's future. It's going to mean a lot of sacrifice for us. We'll have to put off retirement, maybe downsize the house later, but he deserves the best possible start." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They could fund a full-frame private education for him, but my Stanford dream was an impossible luxury. I looked at David. He was staring at his shoes, a faint blush on his cheeks. He knew. Even then, he knew it was wrong, but he said nothing. He took the gift that was built on the ashes of my dream. The next 4 years were a grind. I enrolled in the local state university. To save money, I lived at home in my childhood bedroom. My life was a monotonous cycle of classes, homework, and work. I got a job bussing tables at a greasy diner, the smell of stale coffee and fried onions clinging to my clothes. On weekends, I worked at a warehouse, stocking heavy boxes, my muscles aching. I'd come home exhausted long after my parents were asleep and force myself to study for my engineering exams. Meanwhile, I'd get calls and texts from David. He'd complain about his dorm food. He'd tell me about his fraternity ski trip to Vermont. He sent pictures from spring break in Cancun. He was living the quintessential college experience, funded by my parents' great sacrifice. The resentment was a bitter pill I swallowed every single day, but I channeled it. I used it as fuel. I promised myself I would work so hard, become so successful, that I would never need anything from anyone ever again. And I did. I graduated at the top of my class. I landed a great job. I got a promotion, then another. I was meticulous with my money, saving every dollar I could. Buying that apartment wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a declaration of independence. It was the finish line of a 10-year marathon. Now, holding that threatening letter, the marathon felt like a sham. The finish line had been a starting gun for a new, more horrifying race. I needed an ally. I needed a professional. I called Sarah. We had been friends in college, part of a small, tight-knit study group for a brutal thermodynamics class. She was fiercely intelligent with a mind that could cut through nonsense like a laser. After graduation, she'd gone to a top-tier law school. We hadn't spoken in a couple of years, lost in the shuffle of building our own careers, but I knew she was the one. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown. I felt a wave of shame as I slid the letter from my parents' lawyer across the table. It felt like airing my family's dirty laundry. She read it, her expression shifting from friendly curiosity to intense professional focus. She read it a second time, her lips pursed. "Parent plus loans," she said finally, her voice low. "Nasty business. Legally, the debt belongs to the borrower, your parents. But they can, and often do, sue the student for repayment in civil court based on the idea of a verbal contract or unjust enrichment. It's your word against theirs. It's designed to be messy." "But there was no contract," I insisted, my voice cracking. "They told me they were helping. They called it a gift." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "Anna, parents don't just wake up one day and decide to sue their daughter for $150,000 out of the blue. Something else is going on here. Something is missing." She paused, then asked the question that would ignite the entire investigation. "Let's go back to the beginning. You got into Stanford. Tell me everything you remember about that scholarship. And I mean everything." I recounted the whole painful story. The thick envelope, my parents' strangely subdued reaction, the legal pad with the inflated numbers, their insistence that it was only a partial scholarship. Sarah listened without interruption, her gaze never leaving my face. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, just staring at the letter on the table. Then she looked up at me. "Anna," she said, her voice precise and clear, "I'm going to ask you a very important question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." "Okay," I said, my heart starting to pound. "Are you 100% certain it was a partial scholarship? Did you ever, with your own two eyes, see a document, a letter, an email from Stanford that explicitly stated the scholarship was partial?" She leaned in closer. "Or did you just take their word for it?" The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. I opened my mouth to give the obvious answer. "Of course, I took their word for it. They're my parents." But the words wouldn't come out. A memory, sharp and clear, flashed in my mind. My dad taking the acceptance letter from my hand, him and my mom reading it together, their heads bowed in conspiracy. I never got a good look at the financial aid section myself. I had just accepted their summary, their verdict. A cold dread, so profound it felt like my blood was turning to ice, washed over me. I don't know," I whispered, the sound barely audible. "I never checked. I just believed them." Sarah nodded slowly, her expression grim. "Then that," she said, tapping the letter from the lawyers, "is not the real battle. This is a symptom. The real battle is finding out what they were hiding from you 10 years ago. And we need to find out now." The days after my meeting with Sarah were charged with a new, nervous energy. The fog of shock and betrayal began to clear, replaced by the cold, sharp focus of a woman on a mission. I was no longer just a victim. I was an investigator, and the subject of my investigation was my own life. My first step was to follow Sarah's advice and become an archaeologist of my own past. I started with the state university I had attended. I called the financial aid office, my voice more confident this time, and requested a complete itemized history of my student loan account. The administrator was helpful, promising to compile the records and mail them within the week. The next call was the one I dreaded. Stanford. It felt like reopening a wound that had never properly healed. I dialed the number for their admissions office, my palms sweating. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached a man in the scholarship awards department. I explained my situation as professionally as I could, stating that I was involved in a legal dispute and required official verification of a scholarship offer from the spring of 2015. The man, a Mr. Henderson, was polite but sounded weary. "Ma'am, that was a decade ago. Those records are in deep archive, and our privacy policies are very strict. I can't release that kind of information over the phone based on a verbal request." My hope plummeted. "Please," I urged, the desperation seeping into my voice. "This is incredibly important. It's not just about money. It's about getting to the truth." There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. "Look," he said, his tone softening slightly, "I can't make any promises, but I'll see what I can dig up. If I find anything, I'll need a formal written request from you or your legal counsel." What was the name again? I gave him my information and hung up, feeling like I had just thrown a message in a bottle into a vast, indifferent ocean. That very evening, as if on cue, my phone rang. The caller ID read Mom. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but a morbid curiosity made me answer. Her voice was like warm honey, a syrupy sweetness that now set off alarm bells in my head. "Anna, darling, your father and I have been beside ourselves with worry. This whole business with the lawyers, it's just a terrible misunderstanding. They were far too aggressive. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? Just the 3 of us. We can sort this all out like a family." The part of me that was still that 18-year-old girl desperate for their approval wanted to say yes. It wanted this nightmare to be a simple misunderstanding. But Sarah's voice was a steel barrier in my mind. "They are not on your side. Every interaction is a calculation." "I don't think that's a good idea, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Don't be ridiculous," she chirped, her tone unwavering. "We love you. We miss you. I'll make your favorite pot roast. Please, Anna, it would mean the world to your father." Against every instinct, I agreed. I told myself it was a reconnaissance mission. I would go. I would listen. And I would not give them an inch. I wanted to look them in the eyes and see if I could find the liars hiding behind the faces of my parents. The dinner was a surreal piece of theater. The house smelled of my childhood, roast beef, and nostalgia. My dad was mostly silent, playing the role of the stoic, wounded patriarch. My mom was the star of the show. She didn't mention the lawsuit directly. Instead, she guided me on a curated tour of my own history, pulling out photo albums and pointing at pictures of a gap-toothed, smiling version of me. "Look how happy we were," she said, her eyes welling up with perfectly timed tears. "I just want to get back to this. We're not getting any younger, Anna. Your father's retirement account took a huge hit in the last recession. We're scared." Then came the pivot, smooth and practiced. She placed her hand on mine. It felt cold. "We know how successful you are now, honey, and we are so incredibly proud. We just need a little help to see us through, a little support from the daughter we gave everything to. That's not too much to ask, is it?" It was a masterwork of emotional blackmail. They were trying to bury me in a landslide of guilt, hoping I would pay them just to make the feeling stop. I sat there, moving the food around my plate, my stomach a tight, painful knot. I saw the trap. I saw the puppeteers pulling the strings. I mumbled an excuse about an early meeting and left as quickly as I could, their disappointed sighs following me out the door. The moment I was in my car, I called Sarah. It was a full-court press of guilt, I told her, my hands gripping the steering wheel. "They're trying to wear me down." "Good," she replied, her voice sharp. "That's a desperation move. It means their legal position is weaker than they're letting on. Hold the line, Anna. We're waiting for our ammunition to arrive." A few days later, the first piece of ammunition came. A thick envelope from the State University arrived. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a complete itemized statement of my student loan account. And there it was, in stark black and white. 4 years of Parent Plus loans disbursed every semester, maxed out to the legal limit. The total was exactly what they had claimed. For a moment, my heart sank. On paper, it was damning. I was about to call Sarah in a panic, but then I remembered her other piece of advice. I sat down at my computer and looked up the IRS rules for the American Opportunity Tax Credit for the years 2015 through 2019. The AOTC was a significant credit, worth up to $2,500 a year for qualified education expenses. The key word was expenses. You could only claim it for money you actually paid. This was the tricky part. I had to get their tax returns. I called my dad, my heart pounding. I feigned confusion. "Hey, Dad, My accountant is asking for some old records, and he mentioned needing to know what educational credits were claimed when I was in school. Could you send me your tax returns from those years? Just for my records." There was a long pause. "Why would you need that, Anna?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "I don't know, Dad. It's just what the accountant said. Something about making sure I don't get in trouble with the IRS down the line. It's no big deal, right?" I held my breath. He grumbled, but he agreed. "Fine, I'll have your mother scan them." An hour later, they were in my inbox. I forwarded them straight to Sarah. Her call came less than 20 minutes later. "Gotcha," she said, and I could hear the triumphant smile in her voice. They claimed it every single year for the maximum amount. "Anna, if they were paying with loan money, that's legal. But if that tuition was covered by a scholarship they knew about, they didn't just lie to you. They lied to the United States government. This is our leverage. This is big." It was a victory, but it felt sickening. I was building a case against my own parents for tax fraud. Each piece of evidence was another crack in the foundation of my world. The next day, the other shoe dropped. An email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simple: Stanford University follow-up. My breath caught. It was from a man named Dean Miller, the current head of scholarship awards. He wrote that he had located the archived file. Ms. Smith. Following up on your inquiry from last week, I have located the archived file pertaining to your admission and scholarship offer from 2015. Per your request, I am attaching a legally certified and notarized affidavit for your use. The affidavit confirms that you, Anna Smith, were awarded the G.H. Thompson Merit Scholarship. This was a full-ride scholarship covering 100% of your tuition, mandatory fees, room, and board for 4 undergraduate years. Our records indicate the official notification for this award was sent via email to the primary address listed on your application. Helen Smith, mail.com. Mail to Helen Smith, mail.com. I trust this information will be of assistance. We wish you the best in resolving your matter. Sincerely, Dean Miller. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process the words. And full ride scholarship, 100% of your tuition, room, and board. My hand trembled as I clicked on the PDF attachment. There it was, an official document bearing the seal of Stanford University, laying out the truth in cold, irrefutable legal language. They had lied. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was a colossal, life-altering lie. They had taken a golden ticket, a future I had earned with my own sweat and intellect, and they had buried it. They had let me spend 4 years grinding away, feeling like a second-class citizen, weighed down by a failure that was never mine. They had watched me struggle, knowing they held the key to my freedom in their inbox. And they did it so they could afford to send my brother to a fancy school. And then, a decade later, after their deception was complete, they had the unmitigated gall to sue me for the very money that the scholarship had saved them. The sadness I had felt for months evaporated. The confusion vanished. In their place, a feeling I had never truly experienced before rose up, a pure, cold, diamond-hard rage. This was no longer about defending my apartment or my salary. This was about reclaiming a stolen past. This was about justice for the 18-year-old girl they had betrayed. I picked up my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. "Sarah," I said when she answered, "I've got it. The smoking gun." There was a brief pause. "Good," she said, her voice grim and ready. "Now we stop defending. Now we attack." Armed with the affidavit from Stanford, I felt an initial surge of righteous power. I imagined walking into court, presenting the document, and watching my parents' case crumble to dust. The truth was on my side. Victory seemed inevitable. But the legal system, I quickly learned, is not a truth machine. It's a grinder. And my parents' lawyer was an expert at feeding it nonsense. Sarah filed the affidavit along with a motion to dismiss the lawsuit on the grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. We sat back, expecting a swift end to the nightmare. The response we received was a masterpiece of legal deflection. Their lawyer didn't dispute the authenticity of the affidavit. Instead, he built a new narrative around it. They claimed they had never seen the email from Stanford. It must have gone to their spam folder, a digital ghost in the machine. They argued that, operating under the reasonable belief that I only had a partial scholarship They had a fiduciary duty as my parents to secure the loans as a safety net. They weren't liars, you see. They were just prudent, loving parents preparing for the worst. The stress and financial liability they took on by signing those loans, they argued, still constituted a form of support that I was morally and legally obligated to repay. It was audacious. It was absurd. And it worked. The judge, a weary man who had likely seen every flavor of family drama, denied our motion to dismiss. He ruled that the question of my parents' knowledge and intent was a matter of fact that had to be decided by a trial. The news was a gut punch. The finish line I had imagined vanished, replaced by a long, dark, and expensive road. The confidence I'd felt was replaced by a creeping, insidious dread. The lawsuit wasn't just continuing. It was metastasizing. That's when my own personal storm began. The stress was a constant, low-grade fever. It was the first thing I thought of when I woke up and the last thing I thought of before I fell into a fitful sleep. My work, once my sanctuary of logic and order, became a struggle. I'd stare at lines of code, but my mind would be in a courtroom, imagining my mother on the stand. I started losing weight. My friends would tell me I looked tired, haunted. My apartment, my symbol of independence, started to feel like a cage. The legal bills from Sarah's firm were piling up on my coffee table, a monument to how much this was costing me. I was burning through my savings to defend myself against a lie. The irony was so bitter it felt like poison. One night, I hit my breaking point. It was after 2 a.m. I was sitting in the dark, staring at another bill, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety, and a thought, ugly and seductive, slithered into my mind. Just pay them. I could end it all. I could call their lawyer, offer a settlement. I could set up a payment plan. I could sign away a portion of my salary for the next 20 years. It would be a capitulation. It would be a victory for their lies. But the noise would stop. The legal bills would stop. The gnawing, relentless stress would finally end. I could have my life back, even if it was a diminished version of it. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Sarah's contact info. I was going to call her. I was going to tell her to draw up the settlement papers. I was going to surrender. My parents had pushed me to the edge, and I was ready to jump. I felt a wave of profound self-loathing. They had finally done it. They had broken me. As I sat there, shrouded in darkness and defeat, a random memory surfaced, a flicker of light in the abyss. It was a memory of my mother from years ago. She wasn't the loving mom from the photo albums. She was the mom who spent hours every night on the family computer, clacking away on the keyboard. She was obsessed with a particular online parenting forum, a place called Tag College-Bound Parents. She had a username, a silly, arrogant handle, and she would spend hours dispensing advice, sharing stories, and I now realized, bragging. A thought so faint it was barely a whisper sparked in my mind. What if she bragged about it? It was a crazy long shot, a digital Hail Mary. The forum was probably a ghost town by now. The posts would be gone, lost to the digital ether. But it was something. It was a single fragile thread in a universe of despair. My heart began to beat a little faster. The call to Sarah could wait. I scrambled for my laptop and booted it up. My fingers, clumsy with a strange mix of hope and desperation, typed the forum's name into the search bar. It was still there, a digital fossil from an earlier internet era. I found the search function. I remembered her username, a cringy handle that was so perfectly her. And ProudMom88. I typed it in and hit enter. The page returned an error. The search function was broken. The archives were too old or corrupted. The flicker of hope was extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. Of course, it was a stupid idea. I slumped back in my chair, the darkness rushing back in. But then the engineer in my brain took over. If the front door is locked, you check the back window. There had to be another way to access old web pages. The Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine. My fingers flew across the keyboard again. I typed in the forum's URL. A calendar appeared, showing snapshots of the site taken over the years. I navigated to 2015. I clicked on April, the month I would have received the Stanford letter. I chose a date, April 28th. I held my breath. The page loaded with agonizing slowness, a dial-up era ghost. It was a snapshot of the forum from that exact day. I started scrolling, my eyes burning from the screen's glare, scanning for that one username. Page after page, thread after thread. Parents worrying about SAT scores, parents arguing about dorm room essentials. It was a sea of digital chatter. Hours passed. The clock on my screen ticked past 3 a.m. My body ached. My eyes felt like sandpaper. I was about to give up, to finally drown in the exhaustion and defeat. And then I saw it, tucked away in a subforum titled College Admissions, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, was a thread. The title of the thread was Dealing with an Unexpected Win. The username next to it in Proud Mom 8. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. With a trembling hand, I clicked on the thread. The post was short, just a few sentences. I read the words, and the entire foundation of my parents' case, their entire universe of lies, shattered into a million pieces. Maine. The atmosphere in the courtroom on the day of the trial was suffocating. It was a small, wood-paneled room that smelled of old paper and stale air conditioning. I sat beside Sarah, my suit feeling like a costume. Across the aisle, my family was assembled like a hostile delegation. My mother, Helen, was dressed in a conservative beige suit, the picture of a grieved motherhood. My father, Richard, sat ramrod straight, his face a stony mask. And behind them, my brother David, looking pale and queasy, steadfastly avoiding my eyes. Their lawyer, Thompson, was a shark in a $1,000 suit. He went first, and his opening statement was a symphony of manipulation. He painted my parents as simple, hardworking people who had mortgaged their future for their children. He used words like sacrifice, devotion, and the American dream. These are good people, he said, his voice resonating with false sincerity. People who did everything for their daughter. And now that she is a successful engineer, enjoying a six-figure salary made possible by their sacrifice, all they ask is that she honor her commitment, that she do the right thing. When my mother took the stand, her performance was flawless. She wept quietly as Thompson led her through a series of questions about their financial struggles. She spoke of sleepless nights, of cutting coupons, of the crushing weight of the loans they took out for me. "We never wanted any of this," she whispered, dabbing her eyes with a perfectly folded tissue. "We just wanted her to acknowledge what we did. We gave her her future, and she's left us with nothing." For hours, it was devastatingly effective. I could feel the judge's sympathy shifting toward her. I felt my own case, my own truth, turning to sand and slipping through my fingers. Then it was our turn. Sarah's approach was a stark contrast. She was calm, precise, and surgical. She called me to the stand and had me recount my version of events. My dream of Stanford, my parents' dose of reality at the kitchen table, my 4 years of grinding through the state university while working 2 jobs. Thompson's cross-examination was designed to humiliate me. "Ms. Smith," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "are you seriously asking this court to believe that a woman of your obvious intelligence, an engineer no less, never once thought to independently verify the single most important financial offer of her young life? You just blindly accepted your parents' version of events?" "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady, looking directly at the judge, because they were my parents, and I trusted them. "A very convenient form of trust," Thompson sneered, before sitting down. After I stepped down, Sarah approached the bench. "Your Honor," she said, her voice commanding the room's attention, "the plaintiffs have built their entire case on a foundation of supposed misunderstanding and memory. They claim they never saw an email, that they acted in good faith. We would now like to introduce evidence that will prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, calculated, and documented deception." A large monitor facing the judge and the witness stand flickered to life. "Your Honor," Sarah continued, "I am presenting a certified, time-stamped snapshot from the Internet Archive, taken on April 28, 2015. The page is from a public internet forum known as College Bound Parents. I saw my mother's hand fly to her pearls, the color drained from her face. My father shot her a look of pure, unadulterated fury. The post in question is from a user with the handle ProudMom88, Sarah continued, her voice like steel. "Mrs. Smith, can you please confirm for the court that this was your username on that forum?" My mother stared at her, mute. Her lawyer leapt to his feet. "Objection. Relevance. This is a fishing expedition." "It is the most relevant piece of evidence in this entire case, Your Honor," Sarah shot back. "It goes directly to the plaintiff's knowledge and intent." "Overruled," the judge said, his eyes now narrowed and fixed on my mother. "Mrs. Smith, answer the question." My mother swallowed, her throat working. I may have used that name on a few websites," she stammered. Thank you, Sarah said, a grim smile touching her lips. Would the court clerk please read the highlighted post from user Proud Momade aloud? A profound silence fell over the courtroom. The clerk adjusted her glasses and began to read, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. Unbelievable. My oldest has to struggle with loans to get into a good school, but my youngest just got a full free ride to California. He doesn't even know yet. Sometimes a parent has to make the tough calls for the good of the whole family. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Thompson stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. My father looked at my mother with an expression of such utter betrayal, it was almost frightening. He had been part of the lie, but it was clear he had no idea she had been stupid enough to document it. But Sarah wasn't finished. She let the weight of the words settle in the room before delivering the killing blow. So, Mrs. Smith, she said, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room, it seems you did know. You knew it was a full free ride, and you made a tough call, a call to hide that life-changing opportunity from your own daughter. Let her believe she'd failed, and then, a decade later, sue her for money you never had to spend. Is that correct? My mother just stared, her face a crumbling ruin. The judge had heard enough. He looked down from his bench, his face a mask of cold disgust. Mrs. Smith, he said, his voice dangerously low, is there anything you'd like to say in response to this revelation? Before she could answer, the final pathetic piece of their conspiracy fell apart. My brother David, who had been shrinking in his seat, suddenly shot to his feet. His face was blotchy, his eyes wild with panic. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at our parents. I told you this was a crazy idea, he yelled, his voice cracking with a decade of pent-up guilt and cowardice. I told you it would blow up in our faces. I never asked for any of it. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession. An admission that he had known, that he had been a silent partner in their crime for his own benefit. The trial was over. The truth hadn't just been revealed. It had been detonated. And the collateral damage was my entire family. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp, final crack that echoed the shattering of everything we once pretended to be. His ruling was not just a legal decision, it was a condemnation. He didn't merely dismiss my parents' lawsuit, he publicly dismantled it, piece by fraudulent piece. This court has witnessed a shocking and malicious campaign of financial and emotional fraud perpetrated by parents against their own child, he said, his voice cold with a fury that was far more intimidating than shouting. He looked down from his bench, his gaze sweeping over my parents, who seemed to shrink in their chairs. The claim is dismissed with prejudice, he declared, meaning they could never again try to bring this case. This court will not be used as a weapon for family extortion. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he delivered the blow that would change everything. Furthermore, he continued, his tone becoming even more grave, based on the clear evidence of misrepresentation, the defendant's testimony, and the plaintiff's own documented admissions of deception, I am referring this entire matter to the Internal Revenue Service for an investigation into tax fraud, and to the District Attorney's Office for a review of potential criminal charges, including conspiracy and perjury. My mother made a small choking sound. My father, who had maintained a stoic facade throughout, finally broke. He slumped in his chair, his face ashen, looking like a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground. They hadn't just lost a lawsuit, they had invited the full, crushing weight of the federal and state government into their lives. Their greed had become a self-destruct sequence. As the judge adjourned the court, a strange numbness washed over me. I had won. The truth had prevailed. But there was no elation, no triumphant fist pump, just a vast, hollow quiet where my family used to be. Sarah placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You did it, Anna, she said softly. You faced them down, and you won. I could only nod, the words stuck in my throat. We gathered our papers and walked out into the long, sterile courthouse hallway. And there they were, waiting, a broken, hostile tableau. My father was the first to speak, his voice a ragged whisper. You've ruined us, he hissed, his eyes burning with a hateful fire. Are you happy now? You've dragged your own family through the mud and destroyed everything. My mother stood beside him, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. The soft maternal facade was gone, replaced by the ugly reality beneath. We gave you life, she spat. We sacrificed everything for you, and you repay us with this betrayal. You are no daughter of mine. For 28 years, those words would have been a kill shot. They would have sent me into a spiral of guilt, desperately trying to fix what I had broken, begging for their forgiveness. But in that moment, something inside me was different. The part of me that craved their approval, that feared their disappointment, had died in that courtroom. It had been replaced by a quiet, unyielding certainty. I looked at my father, the weak man who enabled a monster. I looked at my brother, the coward who benefited from her cruelty. And I looked at my mother, the architect of it all. "You have it backwards," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and steady. "I didn't destroy this family. You did." I looked directly into my mother's eyes. "You destroyed it 10 years ago in our kitchen when you decided my future was a commodity you could bargain with. You destroyed it every time you lied to me. Every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough, all while you were hiding the truth." I took a breath. The words I had needed to say for a decade finally found their way out. "My success is not your retirement plan. My accomplishments are not yours to claim. And my life," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "is not your property to control." "I love the people I thought you were," I continued, the words tasting like ash. "But they never really existed. I'm done trying to win the approval of ghosts." I held their gaze for a moment longer. Then I turned my back. I didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing more to say. I walked down that long hallway, past the security guards and the metal detectors, toward the heavy glass doors that led to the outside world. Each step was a release. I was walking away from the lies, the manipulation, the guilt, the 1,000 invisible strings they had used to control me. I pushed open the doors and stepped into the bright, indifferent sunlight. And for the first time in my life, I felt the profound, terrifying, and exhilarating lightness of being completely and utterly free. The 18 months that followed the trial were not a period of celebration, but one of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. You don't just walk away from a building collapse unscathed. You have to sift through the rubble, tend to your wounds, and then slowly, carefully, start building something new. My first act of reconstruction was to sell the apartment. It was a beautiful place, my first great accomplishment, but it was tainted. The walls held too many memories of sleepless nights, of pacing the floor with a phone pressed to my ear, of staring at stacks of legal documents that represented my family's betrayal. It wasn't a home anymore. It was the scene of the crime. I accepted a promotion at work that came with a relocation package, a new city, a few states away, where no one knew my name or my story. It was the ultimate fresh start. I bought a smaller condo, one that didn't scream, "I've made it," but instead whispered, "I'm safe." It became my sanctuary. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. My work was engaging. My colleagues respected me for my skills, not my lineage. I explored my new city, found a favorite coffee shop, a good hiking trail. I was building a life, not just a career. One of the most surprising things that came out of the ordeal was an invitation to speak at a small local TEDx event. A journalist who covered local tech stories had written an article about my case, not focusing on the family drama, but on the novel way I had used the Internet Archive as a digital forensics tool to win my case. An organizer for the event read the article and reached out. The theme of their event was redefining value. They wanted me to speak. I was terrified. But Sarah convinced me otherwise. "Your story isn't just about you, Anna," she had said. "It's for everyone who has ever been made to feel small. For everyone who has ever had their worth questioned by the people who were supposed to build them up." So I agreed. I stood on that small stage under the bright lights, my heart pounding, and I told my story. I didn't focus on the anger or the legal maneuvering. I talked about the invisible price tags that families sometimes place on their children. I talked about the courage it takes to write your own story. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Afterwards, person after person came up to me, not to offer pity, but to share their own stories. I realized my pain, once a source of shame, had become a bridge to connect with others. I kept in touch with Sarah, of course. She had become more than my lawyer. She was the truest friend I had. She gave me the occasional grim update. The IRS investigation had been, in her words, a financial colonoscopy. My parents were forced to pay back 10 years of fraudulent tax credits, plus steep penalties and interest. It wiped out what little savings they had. They had to sell the family home I grew up in and move into a small rental apartment. Their social circle, built on a facade of middle-class respectability, evaporated once the story of the trial became local gossip. David, my golden boy brother, faced his own reckoning. His prestigious firm had a zero-tolerance ethics policy. Being named in a fraud and perjury investigation, even as just a witness who confessed his complicity on the stand, made him radioactive. He was quietly fired. The expensive education my parents had stolen for him had led him to a dead end. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the story was over. I was healing. I was moving on. I had even adopted a scruffy terrier mix from the local shelter, Buster, a fellow survivor who was learning to trust again. Life was quiet. And then a package arrived. It was a small, flat-rate box, addressed to me in handwriting I recognized instantly. A David's. My first instinct was to throw it in the trash, unopened. What could he possibly have to say to me? But a deeper, more cautious part of me, the part that had learned never to underestimate my family's capacity for drama, took over. I brought it inside and placed it on my kitchen counter, staring at it as if it were a bomb. After an hour, I carefully cut it open. Inside, there was no sentimental garbage, no old photos. There was just a letter and a thick stack of documents held together by a binder clip. I read the letter first. It was not an apology. It was a confession born of pure, pathetic self-preservation. Anna, I know you hate me. I probably deserve it. My life is ruined because of what happened. I can't get a job. Dad and Mom won't even talk to me anymore. They blame me for yelling in court. And I've been doing a lot of thinking. I need to clear my conscience, but I also need to protect myself. The DA is still looking at this whole mess, and I don't want to be charged as a co-conspirator. Enclosed are the documents you need to see, the ones that show the whole truth. It was worse than you thought. My blood ran cold. And worse? How could it possibly be worse? I picked up the stack of documents. They were brokerage account statements. The account was in David's name, opened in the summer of 2015, just a few months after I was supposed to have started at Stanford. And then I saw it. The first deposit. It was for $250,000. I stared at the number, my mind struggling to connect the dots. Where did they get that kind of money? I looked at the date, and then I understood. Stanford's estimated cost of attendance for a year, including tuition, room, board, and fees, was around $62,500 back then. Multiplied by 4 years, it was exactly $250,000. My parents hadn't just saved the money from my scholarship. That was the story I had pieced together, the one I thought was the truth. But the reality was infinitely more sinister. They had gone to a financial advisor, presented my full-ride scholarship award, as if it were a grant they had received, and taken out a portfolio loan against the total value of my 4-year education. They had monetized my future. They had turned my accomplishment into liquid cash. The statements laid out the whole sickening story. They had deposited that $250,000 into a brokerage account in David's name, making him the legal owner and a direct accomplice. They used that money as a slush fund. I saw the withdrawals. Tuition payments for David's private university, a down payment on a new car for my dad, a vacation to Hawaii. But the worst part, the part that made me feel physically ill, was their investment strategy. They hadn't been conservative. They had plowed the money into high-risk speculative tech stocks, hoping to get rich off the back of Yam, my stolen future, to Yam. For a few years it worked. The account grew. But then I saw the catastrophic losses from a few years ago when the market turned. They had made a few terrible bets and had been wiped out. Over 80% of the initial capital was gone. And suddenly everything clicked into place. The lawsuit wasn't just an act of spiteful revenge. It was a desperate, insane attempt to recoup their losses. They weren't suing me for the money they had spent on me. They were suing me for the Chennad seed money they had stolen in my name and then gambled away. They believed, in their twisted minds, that the $250,000 was rightfully theirs. And I was the cat insurance policy to get it back. I dropped the papers on the counter. The room felt like it was spinning. All this time I thought I had uncovered the truth, but I had only scratched the surface. This wasn't a story of deception and family favoritism. This was a story of calculated, premeditated fraud on a level I could never have imagined. They hadn't just hidden my dream from me. They had sold it to the highest bidder and then lost the profits at the casino. David's letter wasn't an act of conscience. It was him throwing our parents under the bus to save himself, providing me with the ammunition to ensure he wouldn't be the one taking the fall. I walked over to the sliding glass door and looked out at the city lights. I didn't feel anger anymore. That emotion was too small, too simple for this. What I felt was a profound, chilling clarity. A final, absolute understanding of who these people were. They weren't just flawed, selfish parents. They were child criminals who had viewed their own daughter as nothing more than a financial instrument, a bearer bond to be cashed in. And in that moment, any lingering trace of doubt, any microscopic what if about whether I had done the right thing was obliterated forever. I was not the one who had destroyed my family. There was no family to destroy. There was only a criminal enterprise with a shared last name. And I had finally, blessedly, escaped. Peace, I've learned, isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a quiet space you build for yourself, one day at a time. Especially after you realize the war you thought you won was just one battle in a much longer, uglier campaign. For me, that peace is the stillness of the early morning, sitting on my small balcony with a warm cup of coffee, watching the city slowly come to life. It's the happy, rhythmic clicking of Buster's nails on the hardwood floor as he trots over to nudge my hand with his favorite squeaky toy. It's the simple, uncomplicated joy of a life that is truly and finally my own. Do I still think about them? Yes, but differently now. After receiving David's package, the story in my head shifted from a tragedy to a case study. The anger I felt after the trial, that white-hot rage, has cooled into something else. It's the cold, hard certainty of an investigator who has finally closed a long, difficult case. I don't grieve for the family I should have had anymore. I see them for what they are. People whose moral compass was so broken that they saw their daughter's triumph not as a thing to celebrate, but as an asset to be liquidated. That final revelation from David was a strange, painful gift. It cauterized the wound completely. There are no more questions, no more lingering doubts. I understand now. The motive behind the lawsuit wasn't just spite. It was a desperate attempt by failed gamblers to force the casino to refund their losses. I was their last, desperate bet. I've had to redefine what forgiveness means in the face of such profound betrayal. It's not about absolving them. What they did wasn't just a lie. It was a crime. It's not about reopening the door to my life. That door is not just locked. It has been dismantled. And the doorway has been bricked over. For me, forgiveness has been the act of fully accepting the truth, no matter how ugly, and then consciously deciding that their story will no longer be my story. It's about letting go of the hope that they will ever feel remorse. Because people like that don't feel remorse for the act, only for getting caught. Forgiveness is taking the power back. Their greed, their desperation, their chaos, it can't touch me here. I am no longer a character in their dark, twisted drama. I am the author of my own. And I am choosing to write a story of peace. The other day, I was unpacking the last box from my move. At the very bottom, I found my copy of the notarized affidavit from Stanford. That single piece of paper had been my sword and my shield, the document I thought was the ultimate truth. For a fleeting moment, I thought about framing it, a trophy from my greatest battle. But then I thought about the brokerage statements David had sent me. And that was the real truth, the final ugly chapter. And I realized I didn't want a trophy from that war on my wall. I didn't want any reminders of that darkness. I looked up at the main wall in my living room. Hanging there is a large framed photograph I took last month. It's a picture of me and Buster at the top of a hiking trail, overlooking a vast green valley. We're both a little muddy. The sun is bright, and I'm laughing. It's not the polite, reserved smile from my old family photos. It's a wide-open, uninhibited laugh of pure, unadulterated freedom. I took the affidavit and the copies of those brokerage statements. I walked them to the shredder in my home office and fed them through, one by one. I watched the truth of their crimes turn into his meaningless confetti. The scholarship affidavit was the story of a battle I was forced to fight. The financial statements were the story of a crime I was lucky to uncover. But that photograph on my wall? That is the story of the life I am choosing to live. A life built not on obligation or debt, not on stolen futures or broken trust, but on loyalty, joy, and a peace that I have earned, one quiet morning at a time. The scholarship affidavit was the story of a battle I was forced to fight. The financial statements were the story of a crime I was lucky to uncover. But that photograph on my wall, that is the story of the life I am choosing to live. A life built not on obligation or debt, not on stolen futures or broken trust, but on loyalty, joy, and a peace that I have earned one quiet morning at a time. There are still scars. I won't pretend there aren't. Sometimes I catch myself flinching at sudden praise, wondering what someone wants from me. Sometimes I wake up from dreams where I'm back at that kitchen table, hearing them tell me I'm just not good enough. But then I open my eyes and see the sunlight pouring into my living room, the books on my shelf, the half-chewed dog toy on the floor, and I remember I made it out. And not just out, I made it through, and I made something better. I've started mentoring younger engineers now, especially first-generation students, because I know what it's like to be talented and terrified, ambitious, and utterly alone. I know what it's like to believe you have to earn your family's love through achievement, and to only realize too late that some people will always treat your success like a betrayal. I tell them, you are not the sum of what your parents gave or didn't give you. You are not your family's savings bond. You are not their backup plan. You are yours. And that message, more than anything, has become my purpose. People sometimes ask if I've forgiven my parents. I always say the same thing. I don't need to. Because forgiveness, for me, isn't about absolving the people who hurt me. It's about refusing to carry the weight of their choices anymore. It's about setting down the story they tried to write for me and picking up the pen myself. So, no, I don't miss them. I don't visit. I don't send Christmas cards or polite check-ins or just thinking of you texts. I don't owe them that. I don't owe them anything. They had a daughter. She worked hard, loved deeply, and believed in their promises. They lost her the moment they decided to treat her future like a bank account, and I am not in the business of rescuing people who willingly set the fire and then cried about the smoke. Buster and I still hike that trail sometimes. He's older now, and his legs don't always cooperate, but when we reach the top, he still does his little victory spin in the grass. I sit with him, watching the wind ripple over the hills, and I think about the long, winding climb that brought me here. It wasn't easy, it wasn't clean, but it was worth it. Because the truth, the one they tried so hard to bury, set me free. And in that freedom, I found myself. Not the daughter they sculpted out of guilt and obligation, but the woman I became in spite of them. Not out of revenge, not out of rage, but out of love. Love for the girl I used to be. Love for the peace I have now. Love for the quiet, steady life I built with my own hands, brick by brick. So if you're watching this and you've been made to feel small by your parents, by your family, by anyone who told you that your dreams cost too much, I want you to hear me. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not wrong for walking away from people who only loved the version of you they could control. You are allowed to reclaim your story. And if they call it betrayal, so be it. Sometimes betrayal is just the name people give to freedom they can't benefit from. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever discovered a truth that was even worse than you had imagined? And how did you find your peace afterward? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.